David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a night. Thanks to everybody who joined me on the live stream, by the way, last night on the David Pakman Show YouTube channel. Thousands and thousands of people coming through and sending comments, and a lot of people signing up for memberships to set up for the next 2 years, because we had results that I am going to go through in detail yesterday. We have results from the House. We have results from the Senate. We have results, very positive results for Democrats when it comes to governor's races, and we'll talk about ballot initiatives. Just so much to discuss. Let's start with the House, then do Senate, and then we are going to kind of sum up about the meaning of everything that happened yesterday and what's next and what is now possible. So in the House, Democrats have won. Democrats took over control of the House. There are still numbers coming in, so it's not, as of right now, 100% clear exactly how many seats Democrats picked up. There are websites right now that have it as plus 26, some as plus 28, others that say it's going to be somewhere in the 30s when it's all said and done. Democrats needed to gain 25 seats. So at the conservative end of those numbers, not an overwhelming victory, but taking over the House is taking over the House. Gerrymandering is something that when it comes to the House works against Democrats. And we have to see it as a win, even if it is one that is not as big as we would have wanted. Some notable races. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not surprisingly, after defeating the incumbent Democrat in the Democratic primary, got 78% of the vote in New York's 14th district, will become the youngest member of the House ever at 29. Actually, is it ever? She'll be the youngest now. I believe it also is ever. At 29 years old. Sadly, our friend J.D. Scholten, who was running in Iowa's 4th district against Steve King, who is one of the most disgusting, extreme, white nationalist, neo-Nazi associated members of the House of Representatives. J.D. Scholten, who I met in New Orleans at Netroots Nation, interviewed him, hung out with him a little bit there. Such a good guy. And would have been such an amazing victory to take down Steve King. But sadly, J.D. Scholten did not win, ending up just shy, about 10,000 votes shy, which in that in that particular district worked out to 50.4 to 47%, about 3.4 percentage points separating them. You know, valiant effort. What does that mean, right? It was close. Is it better for it to have been close than not? Maybe, because it signals that even those red districts could be turned blue. I sent JD a message, and it's just a real disappointment. Good news from the House. Congressman Russia, also known as California's Dana Rohrabacher, he lost to Democratic challenger Harley Ruda. That is fantastic news, because not only is he an extremist Republican, he's also one of the most Russia co-opted members of the House of Representatives. And it is fantastic that he is on his way out. And now, as soon as Democrats are sworn in January, it's time to get going. And the question is, well, what do we get going on? Number one, investigations. And I don't mean just Trump. We have been dealing with in the Trump administration at large, not just the White House, with one of the most corrupt, self-serving, truth-ignoring groups of people that have maybe ever made up an administration. David Corn is already reporting that House Democrats have started to put together a list of areas of investigation and subpoenas related to the Trump administration. The House has dozens of committees and subcommittees, and they have some serious investigative power. And you are going to likely see the Intelligence Committee revive the Trump-Russia investigation, but in a serious way, not one where Republican Devin Nunes, Trump's buddy, is running back and forth to the White House telling Trump exactly what the committee is doing. It will be hopefully a non-farcical investigation. You're going to see Foreign Affairs hopefully look at the Trump-Saudi relationship and potential violations of the emoluments clause with Saudi Arabia, but also with a whole bunch of other countries in their attempts to ingratiate themselves with Trump by staying at his hotel in Washington, D.C. when they come in for official business. The Department of Homeland Security can get right in the middle of the policy of child separations that is being carried out by the Trump administration at the border. Armed services can investigate whether Trump is violating the law by using the military as law enforcement when he sends them to the U.S.-Mexico border to play cops because of the immigrant caravan that is quickly dwindling in size and very slowly approaching the U.S.-Mexico border. Trump's cabinet members could and should find themselves under investigation. You've got Wilbur Ross, Ben Carson, Ryan Zinke, we've talked about, Betsy DeVos. They've all been accused of wrongdoing. They all should be investigated by the House. If Donald Trump found fake news an annoyance in doing whatever the hell he wants, I think he doesn't yet know what it's like to have a opposition House of Representatives investigating you in a serious manner. And then there are even more. I mean, oversight and government reform, they've got a very long list of things they want to investigate Trump about. This includes, why are they adding a citizenship question to the census? And what are the motivations for doing that? What about the endless White House security clearance scandals? What about the Muslim travel ban? What about that ambush in Niger that left 4 soldiers dead? And the Trump Foundation and Trump's response to the Puerto Rican hurricane, use of private email by the White House. All of this stuff is now on the table. And then put all of that aside. Then there's the House Judiciary Committee, and they have another list, which I'm not even going to get into right now. And what I absolutely believe we need to demand of Democrats when they take over control of the House of Representatives, they must investigate the racially tinged voter purges that have taken place in states all across the country. It's time to use the subpoena power. This is an attack on our democracy. There are attacks on our democracy happening from foreign powers, and there are attacks on our democracy for the benefit of the Republican Party happening internally. And then, in addition to the investigations, can we take control of the 2020 census back? Because that has become a disaster under Donald Trump. Can we take control or prevent more outrageous tax reform bills? All of these possibilities are now on the table because the Democratic Party is taking over control of the House of Representatives. We will be speaking about this a lot more later in the program. Let's transition now from the House to the Senate. In the Senate, exactly as I predicted, Republicans maintain control and gain seats. Officially right now, Republicans are +2 in the Senate, but there are still some races in limbo. By the time you hear this or watch this, maybe by tomorrow's program, that number will actually have grown to 3 or even possibly 4. So the results in line generally with the polling, in line with my prediction yesterday that Democrats would take over the House, that Democrats would make gains in terms of governors, and that Democrats would not regain control of the Senate. That's exactly what we are seeing. Notable races in the Senate. Beto O'Rourke, right? Beto O'Rourke losing to Ted Cruz in Texas by 2.6%. Do we say that this was just a loss because Beto lost, or do we say, losing by only 2.6% as a Democrat to an incumbent Texas Republican senator, that's actually not that bad? I don't know. Guess it depends whether you're sort of like a glass half full or half empty type of person. In Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema was defeated by Republican Martha McSally by under 1 percentage point. That was a disappointment. Bill Nelson versus Rick Scott in Florida. Scott won by 0.4%. Very disappointing. Bill Nelson already calling for a recount there. I sometimes get the feeling that in Florida, you could have a serial killer versus someone else, and the serial killer could be the Democrat or the Republican, quite frankly, and it would sort of be close because it just seems to always be that way in the state of Florida. And unfortunately, as of right now, pending a recount that changes the results, that one did not go our way. And a really big win for Democrats is Jackie Rosen in Nevada. She was running against incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller. She won hugely by 5%. And that is the Democratic +1. And then otherwise, we have Republican wins. Republicans picking up North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp lost, incumbent Democrat. Huge loss by 11. I mean, that is a race we're going to have to analyze in more detail by itself, because it is just such a disaster for the Democratic Party and the playing politics and calculating what exactly should she and shouldn't she say about Brett Kavanaugh when that was going on. I mean, just everything that is horrible about national politics was reflected in Heidi Heitkamp's race and eventual loss in North Dakota. In Indiana, we had incumbent Democratic Senator Joe Connolly. He lost hugely to Republican challenger Mike Braun by almost 10 points. It is Indiana, but it's still embarrassing when the incumbent loses that bad. And then in Missouri, we saw incumbent Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill just completely fail and lose by 6 points to Republican Josh Hawley, who will take over there. So again, so far for what's official, as of literally this moment, Democrats picked 1 up. Republicans picked up 3. That's +2 for Republicans. And we are anticipating that there's going to be a little more for Republicans. Either way, they won't have a super majority, but they will maintain a majority and it will be slightly bigger. Important data point for the popular vote. Okay. In Senate races yesterday, Democrats received 12 million more votes than Republicans. Okay. In California, in Feinstein versus Kevin DeLeon, you had 2 Democrats. So when you've got Democrats running against each other, that gives you more Democratic votes. DeLeon got 2.7 million votes. So even if we take those out, Democrats in Senate elections still won the popular vote by 10 million votes yesterday. This is just sort of the basics of how population distribution works against Democrats. 10 to 12 million more votes, but lost seats. And that is another issue that is sort of a systemic issue that we've spoken about for a very, very long time. So not to pat myself on the back, because I just said I think what the polls suggest is going to be what happens. Many in the audience with the same prediction. Democrats take the House, Republicans take the Senate. And after the break, what I'm going to dig into are the political implications and so much more about what this means. And it's not all great for Democrats and the left, as you can probably imagine. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Major program today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a big thank you on this post-election day results show to 2 really great people. Laura Berenson is today's new David Pakman Show member of the day. Kenneth Chaplin is today's sustaining member of the day. He's been with us since 2013, 5 years of membership. Vote Soon 18 is gone, as I said it would be, because yesterday was election day and 18 is now behind us. I will talk to you about the future of 2020 in a few different contexts shortly. But in the meantime, support the program, patreon.com/David Pakman Show, www.joinpakman.com. Okay, so let's now step a little bit away from the specific results in the Senate and in the House yesterday and think about what this means for the future of political movements, including the progressive movement, which is the one I care about. Normally, it is a great time for the opposition party, the party not in the White House, to make progress when you have a midterm after a presidential election. Trump and Republicans winning in 2016, 2018, just simply speaking, historically at the base level, was expected to be a good midterm for Democrats. However, the Senate was stacked against Democrats. And what I mean by that is that you had mostly Democrats defending seats and Republicans not. you had a lot of Republican Senate seats that were just not up this year. So we already did the detailed results, but Dems won the House, lost the Senate, and did gain control of some new governorships, which I'll mention momentarily. I am going to need to talk some sense here to people on both sides of this so-called blue wave. First of all, on paper, it really wasn't a bad night for Democrats. I know that for a lot of people, and I've been seeing the tweets and the emails, it didn't really feel like it was a huge blue wave, but you've got to understand that the degree to which it was stacked against Democrats. In the Senate, Democrats with way more seats to defend because Republicans had 42 seats. They almost had a majority, 42 out of 50, that weren't even up for re-election. They were totally impervious to the blue wave since they're simply not up for re-election. So yes, Democrats were at a disadvantage. They've lost so far 2 seats net in the Senate. It might end up being 3 or 4. We will see. But Democrats did lose some key races that they should have been able to hold. I mentioned the Heidi Heitkamp disaster. I get it. It's the Dakotas. But it shouldn't have been as lopsided as it was. Claire McCaskill, another example. I get it. It's not the most blue state, Missouri, but yet another race that I believe was bungled. So that is extraordinarily concerning. In the House, Democrats took control, which is great. Barely, though. They needed 25 seats in terms of a net gain. They got, depending on where it'll be when it's all said and done, is it 28? Is it somewhere in the low 30s? It's not totally clear. The results in Florida were an absolute disaster. Andrew Gillum losing there for governor and Bill Nelson losing his seat to Rick Scott in the Senate. Florida, really big disaster for Democrats. For governorships, it actually overall was a really good night. Democrats gained 7 governorships yesterday, a net gain of 7, and Republicans had, understandably, obviously, a net loss of 7 seats. That being said, Stacey Abrams in Georgia lost by just 1.9% in Georgia. And there was voter suppression there. It's not actually clear to me that she lost. I got a couple calls yesterday from people saying, David, should Beto O'Rourke contest the results in Texas? I don't think so. I don't know that Beto O'Rourke lost because of foul play. In Georgia, however, where you had the guy running the election, Secretary of State Brian Kemp, also running as the Republican candidate for governor, and you had deregistration, voter purges, limited voting hours, closed polling places, and in the end, it's that tight. I do think that that's one that needs to be looked into. Other governorships that went the way of Democrats. Maine is a good one. Michigan is interesting. Wisconsin is absolutely huge, where Scott Walker was defeated. The guy is disgusting, and it is so great to see him kicked out. Illinois, Democrats took over the governorship. Kansas, where nightmarish Chris Kobach was defeated, and we'll talk about that a little more. New Mexico and Nevada saw governorships turn blue. And to me, this is one of the biggest wins from last night. Taking over the House is very important, but taking over 7 governorships is so important because this is now 7 more states that could decide to follow the Paris climate guidelines, even if Donald Trump pulls the United States out of that agreement at the national level. This is 7 more states that can legalize marijuana, as some states did, and restore voting rights to felons, as some states did, or protect workers' rights, which Scott Walker was not doing in Wisconsin, quite the opposite. So that is really, really big. And then the other good news from yesterday is that if you look at some specific states, you see that Trumpism destroyed them. And I want to go back to Kansas, the very red state of Kansas, where Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton by 20 points in 2016, 56 to 36. They have a Democrat who is going to be governor, defeating Trump crony Chris Kobach. Democrats in Kansas also took 1 of 4 House seats from an incumbent Republican, and the person who took it is Sharice Davids, which is huge. So in Kansas, we've really seen how bringing in this cut taxes and defund social programs, Sam Brownback right-wingerism, Trumpism, I don't know what name you want to assign to it, it led to a definitive leftward move for Kansas. That is really great news. And then also good news are the ballot initiatives. Florida banned offshore drilling and banned indoor vaping. They restored voting rights for felons. Michigan legalized marijuana by popular vote. They will be the 10th state to legalize marijuana. That's a clear trend nationally, and it's of course going to continue. The momentum continues to build. So listen, the big picture is Democrats took the House. They didn't lose that much in the Senate, given how the races favored Republicans. They gained 7 governorships, and a bunch of different progressive ballot initiatives were passed. We won the popular vote in Senate races by 12 million votes. If you account for 2 Democrats running in California, it's more like 9.5 million votes, and won the popular vote overall. If you look at the popular vote across everything that happened yesterday at the governors, House, and Senate, Democrats won the popular vote by about 8 percentage points. That's a blowout. Okay. In American politics, that is a blowout by any standard. So Republicans do need to be very worried. There's all the positive stuff, okay, that we're getting out of the way. But here's where it starts to get very, very ugly. First of all, does taking over the House and plus 7 governors do a damn thing about turning around the corporate takeover of our political system and our economy for the last 40 years? The answer is it doesn't do a thing. And it's not fair to expect that you would change that with one election. And I know that we can say, well, there have been some further leftists that won in the House, AOC in New York, and some others. That's fine. But only if they're able to achieve change is that going to be a success point. So, number one, when I see the most destructive and ignorant president in decades single-handedly destroying important geopolitical alliances around the world, making the United States look like a joke, insulting everyone, making economic policy with a total lack of understanding of the consequences of that policy, and Democrats barely take over the House, I'm not just blaming voters. I'm not just blaming the Democratic Party, but we've got to get it together, okay? If you care about what's going on, you have to vote. And I know voter turnout was up. I know that it was, but it's got to be up more because otherwise we're getting crushed in 2020. Okay. If there was ever a time to vote, wasn't it yesterday? And meanwhile, it's great that Democrats took over the House and gained 7 seats in terms of governors, but there is still no cohesive Democratic strategy. There is this jumping back and forth between playing Republican light and being more progressive, being the sane centrist and being Republican light in this constant revolving door. And most importantly, because it's okay to run races differently based on where you're running. That's not the issue. The issue is that Democrats' big picture, with exceptions, are not speaking to voters in a way that truly resonates in terms of why shouldn't they be afraid of losing their status, perceived or real, if they support Democrats. That was one of the top motivating factors for people voting for Donald Trump, the fear of losing the status they either perceive they have, actually have, or think maybe they would have at some point in the future. I'm not saying that Democrats need to run the exact way that Republicans run, because then we're just Republicans. That's not the point I'm making. But if so many people, you have the right policies within a reasonable sort of Overton window, if you are a Democrat on many issues, but the voters aren't understanding that. And that's a communication issue fundamentally. And then also they ran a lot of crappy campaigns. How can the Democratic Party expect to win when this is what they're able to do after 2 years of Trump and some of the worst governance that we've ever seen? I am not one to defend Michael Avenatti's political approach. I have my problems with him. But the one area where I do agree with Avenatti is that he says we actually need to fight And that doesn't mean compromise our principles. It doesn't mean do things that we find immoral. But Trump will crush us in 2020 if we continue the waterfalls and ginger snaps approach that too many, but not all Democrats take. You can't be Republican light. You can't pretend that you don't need to play the game, period. And if you are disappointed, and you should be to some degree, even though there were victories last night, we have a new project. We have 2 years now where the goal is clear. Take over the White House, take over the Senate, expand control of the House, and get a majority in terms of governorships. And I'm going to be talking about that shortly. Let's briefly pause from the election-related stuff just to do a little Hatriot Mail after all. Why not? Take a listen to this.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, and this week's Hatriot Mail, like most, needs no introduction. Let's take a listen to this week's Hatriot Mail.
You're an idiot, Packerman. And yes, you are a socialist. Leftists of all kinds always deny their leftisms. You're either ignorant, stupid, crazy, or an evil liar because at the end of the day, you're a collectivist who doesn't understand what is collectivism, is authority, and what is authoritarianism always stems from. Hillary lost, lol.
This is so silly. Like, don't you think at this point, if I were a socialist, I would just say it? Like, I'm already getting all the downsides of people pretending or believing me to be a socialist. What do I gain now by denying that I'm a socialist? I'm a social democrat. I believe in private ownership of businesses, but I think that we have to make sure nobody gets left behind in our system. If I were a socialist or a communist or a Marxist, I would just tell you, come on, you know me well enough. Use the coupon code Hatriot40 every time you do it. 286 Hatriots cry. When you use the coupon code Hatriot40 and sign up for membership, it's kind of like a middle finger to the Hatriots, which I know a lot of people in our audience relish doing. Go to www.joinpacman.com, select any membership, and use the coupon code Hatriot40 at checkout, Hatriot40. It'll save you 40%. The Hatriots will cry, and you'll be supporting independent media.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is now time to talk briefly about the 2020 election, which starts today. I have said for 2 years now, when people say, David, start talking about who you want to see run in 2020. What do you think will happen between the 2018 midterms and 2020? I've been hesitant because I wanted to keep my eye on the most immediate project, which was the 2018 midterms. Those are now behind us, although we still don't know the exact results from all races. And the reality is that 2020 is starting earlier than ever, and it starts today effectively. Not in the literal sense, but this is a long process, and it's a process that, because of the specifics of what is going on right now with the Trump administration, with what is understandably and positively a huge insurgence, a huge rise in the number of people participating in politics, there is a clamoring to start sorting out 2020 now. And one of the analogies that I think really applies here is that you can destroy things way more quickly than you can build them. And what I mean by that is, think about a building, for example. Imagine putting together a building. You've got to make the plans and find the location, permitting, excavation, pouring the foundation, building up exterior walls, electrical and plumbing and internal walls. And then when you say it's time to knock it down, some dynamite or a few wrecking balls can be brought in, and in a couple of hours, you've undone what could have taken, in some cases, years to build. And it's the exact same thing that we have seen with our politics under Donald Trump. Political alliances around the world that were built on decade upon decade of diplomacy and geopolitical understanding have been destroyed very, very quickly. Donald Trump's tariffs, which he created on a whim in the sense that he started to realize he was getting a reaction from people on the campaign trail that was positive, putting in place these tariffs that cause retaliatory tariffs, shake up the entire sort of status quo of the economic relationships of the United States with other countries. There's no undoing that now by the same flip of a switch. We need negotiations. We need meetings. We need cooperation agreements with other countries. It is going to take a long time, if at all, under the Trump administration, and it may not happen until later, to undo the damage that he so quickly did with those tariffs. So we do have to start talking about 2020 now. And I'm not doing horse race stuff. I'm not actually saying I'm now pretending that we are in full 2020 election mode, but there are a few important things I want to mention. Number one, I believe that Bernie Sanders is going to run for president on the Democratic side. I don't want to say more than should be said about it right now, but there are people I have spoken to personally who are in positions where they can reliably talk about this issue. And there is a significant group of these individuals who are placed in a way that they could say it with some certitude that Bernie Sanders is going to be running for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020. How that relates to whether other progressives rather than just Democrats run is something that needs to be thought of already. Bernie Sanders runs and Elizabeth Warren runs. What happens is that what are the dynamics of that in the context of, as the two most progressive members of the Senate, comparing and contrasting them to a more sort of establishment centrist figure? That's going to become an issue, from what I am told, pretty soon, pretty early in 2019. That is going to be a thing that we are going to be talking about and discussing. In 2020, either Donald Trump will be running for re-election, in which case the goal is that we have 2 years now to weaken him as much as possible. Taking over the House of Representatives is a good first step in achieving that, as long as, and this is the risk, Democrats cannot allow themselves to be framed as obstructionists for the next 2 years. Because if Donald Trump is not able to get anything done during the next 2 years and has to explain that to his base, maybe he won't even have to explain it, but if he did, Democrats are going to get blamed for obstructing because, after all, Democrats now control the House. Now, of course, this ignores so many political realities, including that even Republicans couldn't get on the same page on so many issues during the first 2 years of Donald Trump's first term, that they internally were responsible for the lack of passage of, I mean, look, the Obamacare repeal didn't fail because of Democratic obstructionism. Even Republicans couldn't get on the same page about how it is that they wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So we've got to prepare, and I hope that the Democrats are doing this already. Everything we prevent them from doing, we will be blamed for obstructing, and we've got to have a way to deal with that. The other issue that's really important for 2020, you've got the presidential race, is that the 2020 Senate election is going to have another roughly third of the Senate up for re-election. 33 seats are going to be up, plus a special election to fill John McCain's seat. So this year, we had 35 seats available in the Senate via elections. There are going to be 33 plus McCain's seat in 2020. The numbers are way better for Democrats in 2020 than they were in 2018. This year, as I mentioned, Republicans had these 42 senators that weren't up for re-election. So Republicans could have lost every single race that they were running in 2018 in the Senate and still had 42 seats. Of course, they didn't do that, and they're going to end up gaining anywhere from 2 to 4 seats is what it looks like as of right now. And that's not all, it hasn't all been settled right now. In 2020, my numbers might be slightly off, but you have incumbent Democrats defending only 12 seats and Republicans will have 21 seats plus that Arizona special election for John McCain's seat. So there are going to be much better numbers for Democrats in the Senate in 2020. You're going to have potentially 22 total Republican seats up for grabs, while Democrats will have to defend only 12. So right away, even if we had, in our disappointment about the blue wave not being as big as we wanted it to be, if we can achieve the same sort of proportional results in the Senate in 2020 that we achieved in 2018, 2020 rather, could be absolutely massive for Democrats in the Senate. Now, the big question that is going to dictate how a lot of this stuff goes and how a lot of these Senate races shape up in practice and sort of their flavor and tone and tenor is going to be who does run for the Democrats in 2020. On the one hand, there are a lot of, in addition to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, there are a lot of really interesting possibilities. And this includes everything from, and I'm not saying I like this, but it includes everything from celebrities up through to and including lower level elected officials who are very progressive. You've got the Castros from Texas. You have people talking about Beto O'Rourke. You've got Kamala Harris's name being thrown around. I'm not saying I like or dislike any of these individuals. There's going to be plenty of time for that. But the idea is that with this much time to think about it, and with such an atrocious person in the Oval Office, Democrats should be able to do some serious damage in 2020 if they actually take the right approach. And we're going to be analyzing in depth exactly what that approach would be. Now, for people who are going to write to me and say, David, 2020? No. It is just way too early to be talking about 2020. We can wait. That's fine. But Trump 2020 starts today. He filed for re-election within days of being inaugurated back in 2017. Trump yesterday had his 2016 campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, with him as they took in the midterm election results. Brad Parscale, who's going to be running Trump's 2020 campaign, was also with him last night. They are starting now. They get it. We need to get it. And in fact, Brian Walsh, who's the president of the pro-Trump America First Action super PAC, said yesterday, the re-elect begins today. It's all in and all on the line. Their policies are horrible. Their moral compasses don't work. They are liars. They are projectors who do the opposite of everything they say they're going to do and say the others won't. But they get that it starts today. The Trump administration departures, I would expect to happen soon, maybe even before the new House and Senate are sworn in January. They are building their sort of final lineup for 2020, other than people who are going to resign, obviously. They are going to have that in place within the next 5 to 6 months. So I am asking you now to commit to this 2-year project. Build the lead in that, build the control of the House. Take control of the Senate. The numbers are in our favor, but we've got to do it. And take over the White House from President Trump. It is difficult to knock out incumbent presidents, even relatively unpopular ones, as we saw in 2004 with George W. Bush. Let's all commit to this. Let's all commit to voting as well. And in that spirit, we want to continue to build the David Pakman Show and continue these 2 years. So we did the minimum we had to do. We took the House back. Okay. Now that opens up some doors for Democrats for the next 2 years. Now is when it is all in, because it's not just a Senate stacked against us, which we probably can't win, and we can take over the House. We're talking about the Senate. We're talking about the presidency. We're talking about trying to get to 50% when it comes to governorships. So we have launched a new coupon code. This is 2020, all one word. This is 2020. That saves you 40% off of a membership at davidpakman.com/membership or www.joinpakman.com. It supports the work that we are doing, and we have major plans, probably too ambitious plans. We're never able to do everything we plan on, but with your support, we can at least do a bunch of it. Let's continue to build. These next 2 years are I am feeling as invigorated as I've ever been for an election cycle going into 2020, and it has begun, and I want to hear from you about it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If there is any way to sort of explain to you how serious the rift with some of our longtime allies has grown, and I've been mentioning this in my election results coverage, the conflict between sort of normal Europe and the nationalist, right-wing populist forces that we've seen rise in the United States under Trump and elsewhere have now gotten to such a point that the French president is saying there should be a real European army created to protect Europe against possible abandonment by allies, including the United States, in the event of military conflict. There is no possible way to overstate the significance of one of our biggest European allies saying that things have changed to such a degree that Europe must militarize together against the possibility of conflicts where the U.S. may not be with Europe, never mind possible conflicts against the United States. Emmanuel Macron said yesterday, or the day before, I believe it was, that, quote, "We have to protect ourselves with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States of America. When I see President Trump announcing that he's quitting a major disarmament treaty, which was formed after the 1980s Euro missile crisis that hit Europe, who is the main victim? Europe and its security. Peace in Europe is precarious." So this was actually interpreted two different ways when news broke of it. One was Emmanuel Macron is saying, we need a European army in case France needs to fight the United States. I actually don't think that's really the right interpretation, although it's of course conceivable. But the truth is that the U.S. and France are both NATO members, and we're supposed to be participating in shared defense. The idea of actual military conflict between France and the United States, even under Trump, is pretty unlikely, fortunately. The more sort of realistic interpretation is that France would be worried that in the case of certain conflicts, the United States may not actually participate in that shared defense and honor the commitments that they've made, or may continue to further back out of commitments that they've made formally. It's going to be really interesting to see how the American right reacts to this, because the normal reaction from the right at the micro level and the country level is, how can we criticize anybody for being prepared to defend themselves? They will apply this to countries in terms of building nuclear arsenals or obtaining huge weapons from massive, big time weapons from the big military industrial suppliers that we talk about all the time. They also apply it to gun owners at the micro level. Will they also apply it to Europe? If your reaction is, doesn't matter, we can take Europe because we have a bigger military, you've already lost the thread. You have no concept of geopolitics. You have no concept of diplomacy. You don't understand networked, modern, globalized worlds. Now, let's be thorough. There's another interpretation of what, and more specifically, why Emmanuel Macron is saying this, and it has to do with Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen is the far-right nationalist who now is part of the Nationalist Rally Party. And if that doesn't sound familiar, it's because she ran against Macron when the party was called the National Front. They've renamed now, and they are the Nationalist Rally Party. They have moved ahead of Emmanuel Macron's party for the first time. The far-right anti-EU parties in France now have a combined 30% support, up from 25%. So thinking, is it cynical? Is it just realistic? If you are Emmanuel Macron and you are a centrist and you see that you are starting to lose to the far-right nationalists in France, one thing you might say to appear tough on the national stage and maybe head off some of the attrition to the far right that you're seeing is, hey, you know what? let's build an army, because what's more nationalist than talking about building armies? Now, the far-right nationalists may not really love the idea of it being a European army because they are anti-EU and maybe want to see France go it alone. But even in this case, it doesn't matter what the motivation is for Emmanuel Macron to say this, and they could be self-serving and sort of cynical motivations. The mere fact that a centrist French leader is even willing to say, we need an army because we might need to protect ourselves if the U.S. doesn't help us, that in and of itself is indicative of how far diplomatic relations with France have fallen. So let's understand this very clearly to sort of sum up. The actual possibility of armed conflict between France and the United States remains extraordinarily low. The U.S. and France, as I mentioned, are NATO members. We are part of joint treaties and agreements of all kinds. But merely using this, as Macron is doing, as a defense or justification for a European army, that is the monumental change in rhetoric and thinking on this issue that we have been predicting is exactly what we would see as a result of how Trump handles himself. Geopolitics have changed very quickly under Donald Trump, and in ways we sort of predicted the way this was going to happen, but it's still shocking to see the French president say this. And when we think about, I mentioned earlier, you can build things over a long period of time and destroy them very quickly. This is another example of that and some of these alliances. Hey, here's something. It's been a very serious day, election results. I just, in a few minutes here, I want to deal with something less serious but extraordinarily annoying. CVS has to do something about their receipts. CVS, the pharmacy chain, is known for really long paper receipts, like comically long. And I was there the other day and was given, I think I bought deodorant before my trip out to Politicon. And I got a receipt that was like 3 feet long. And then I started Googling this, and it turns out that some people have actually received receipts at CVS that are almost 6 feet long in some cases, some people posting them to social media, buying just an item or two and getting receipts almost 6 feet long. Can't we just stop this? Like, has CVS issued any kind of statement about why this is something they're doing? I've seen nothing about sort of a defense of 6 foot long receipts. It's a disgusting waste of paper. It is comical, but it's absolutely and totally ridiculous. And I don't know if it's, is it, you know how Starbucks will I don't know because I don't go to Starbucks, but I've seen on the internet that Starbucks employees will sometimes misspell names on people's cups, even seemingly like easy to spell names. And I wonder, is that a marketing ploy because they know people will post the pictures and it becomes this funny thing? And, oh, yeah, I should go to Starbucks and get one of those $7 Frappuccino things or whatever. But if CVS is doing this as a marketing ploy, it's one that's terrible for the environment, given how much paper they are wasting on this stuff. And we talk about saving the environment by getting rid of plastic straws and saving the environment by not wasting food. Do we really need multi-foot long receipts from CVS for any dumb purchase? And as if they're not doing enough damage with just that, the paper cup thing at Starbucks also has an environmental cost. It's easy to say, well, the Starbucks one has no environmental cost. Those paper coffee cups, the way that they prevent the coffee from making the paper soggy is that they have a liner, and that liner is of dubious recyclability. So anyway, I don't go to Starbucks, so I don't really care about that one. But I might have to reconsider my CVS trips if they keep giving me 6 foot long receipts. And some places now actually will ask you, do you want your receipt? And if you say yes, they press a button and it prints. And if you say no, they don't even give you a small receipt. I would like to see CVS go in that direction. But if you actually believe that this is a marketing ploy to get people talking about it, let me know, because that would be, in some sense, it's almost kind of brilliant. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a depressing voicemail related to the midterm elections this week. Take a listen.
Well, once again, it's been proven. Evil wins out over good. except in the movies
Mm.
and on TV. If evil is willing to cheat and lie and steal and manipulate,
Mm.
and good is not willing to do those things, evil always wins.
Yeah. So I share the depression that you are experiencing because it didn't go as well as we wanted. But I feel like I'm being realistic when I say the Senate was stacked against us and we didn't lose that much. Doesn't really change the balance because they controlled it anyway. Taking over the House is good. I will never be upset if my side doesn't do voter suppression just because they're doing it. I will not be critical of my side for not using deliberately bad faith and toxic arguments. But where I agree is that the left needs to understand how it is that the right is winning and how to fight against it. Because if we don't, we will get crushed in 2020. So I believe that this is the beginning. I am now working on 2020. I want you joining me in doing that. That's why I'm calling for people to sign up for memberships and make contributions. The media determines the narratives on so many of these issues that end up at deciding elections. So if you want to make an investment in the election going the way you want, you have to make an investment in media that represents your values and doesn't stoop to the level that they are willing to stoop to. We've got a great bonus show today. We will talk about so many things, including the latest with the studio and much, much more. Thanks to everybody for watching. The 2-year countdown starts now.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.